Tonight, skyrocketing inflation begins to cool down, fueling new hope for the economy heading into the Christmas season.
Make no mistake, prices are still too high. We have a lot more work to do, but things are getting better.
Plus, scientific breakthrough, a historic advancement in nuclear fusion that could harness the power of the sun. And he's one of the many fresh faces of the 118th U.S. Congress, a Missouri lawmaker called to serve.
It's time for us to reassert our trust in God. It's time to realize that we need Him more than He needs us, and it's time to turn to God for the healing of America.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Soaring inflation finally beginning to tick down. Welcome to Faith Nation from our News Bureau in Washington. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, new hopeful economic numbers. The inflation rate falling for the second consecutive month, indicating the economy may be cooling off.
That's right. Inflation hit 7.1% for the month of November. In the preceding month of October, that number was 7.7%. The Consumer Price Index out today showing the rate of inflation declining for the fifth month in a row. The core CPI index, which does not include food and energy costs, rose only 0.2% in November. That's the smallest monthly increase in over a year. President Biden told reporters this morning he thinks prices are still too high, but he added the economy is headed in the right direction.
I want to be clear. It's going to take time to get inflation back to normal levels as we make the transition to a more stable and steady growth. But we could see setbacks along the way as well. We shouldn't take anything for granted. But what is clear is that my economic plan is working and we're just getting started.
The easing inflation suggests the Federal Reserve's continued interest rate hikes could be working. The Fed is expected to increase interest rates by 0.5 point this month rather than the 3/4 point hikes the central bank has deployed in recent months. Well, joining us now is Dr. Stephen Skanke, Chief Economic Advisor at Kill Point. Stephen, welcome as always. So President Biden said he is hopeful prices will come down back to normal levels by the end of the next year and suggested they will not go up until then. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen predicts a major inflation cool down in 2023. Stephen, is the worst of the inflation over?
Well, it looks to be over. What we still have to see is housing prices come down. That is rent, owner equivalent rent, the cost of shelter, accommodations when traveling, which still were up 0.8% and 0.7% respectively in November. But part of that is a technical problem with the way the government measures it. And we're certainly encouraged to see some of the private sector measures showing that that those housing and rental costs are also starting to fall pretty rapidly.
Yeah. The effects of the Fed's interest rate hikes are taking some time to settle in as expected. Could these hikes, Stephen, steer us into a recession? And is a recession actually necessary to begin to bring down prices?
Well, Jenna, they certainly could steer us into a recession. We can also talk ourselves into a recession, but the higher interest rates do slow the economy. And you saw after the November Federal Reserve meeting where the governor, where Jay Powell, and in the announcement generally, they said the cumulative effects of what they've been doing need to be assessed because they also operate with a lag. And so the Fed certainly doesn't want to push us into a recession if they don't need to. And as they slow down the rate of increase to 0.5%, as John said, and probably at the end of January or on February 1, maybe 0.25%, they're giving us time to see those changes actually start to take place.
Stephen, while energy prices are beginning to come down, the rest of the economy, it seems like inflation is still proving pretty sticky. Why the persistence?
Well, the persistence has been in services. And some part of services inflation has come down, but it is that housing, rents, hotel accommodations, which are about a third of the CPI and a big part of services. So that's where we're waiting to see what's actually going on in the economy catch up with the way it gets reported in the CPI. That's also been more resistant to what the Fed has been trying to do. But, you know, on the headline side of it, energy, as you mentioned, John, we will probably see headline inflation negative in the December report, just as a result of how much gasoline prices have fallen in the last couple of weeks.
All right. Stephen Stanke at Kill Point, thank you so much for your time and your perspective.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Well, on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are introducing a bipartisan bill to ban TikTok in the U.S. TikTok is one of the most popular social media apps, particularly among young people, with more than 200 million downloads in the U.S. alone. The app is free to use, but it does come with a price, and that is being under the microscope of the Chinese Communist government. Republican Governor Kristi Noem is already banning the app for state employees in South Dakota. Noem telling CBN's David Brody about her executive order banning TikTok on all state networks and devices.
We recognize and understand that the Chinese government is using this app to collect data on citizens here in our country, that they could even access personal information, get access to our financial institutions, and it is a cybersecurity threat that we need to take action against.
And Noem says any state employer or contractor who downloads the app will be committing a criminal offense. And with that, David joins us now. We should mention David's interview. You can find more of that on cbnnews.com. David, great interview with the governor. As for this new bipartisan bill banning TikTok in the United States, does it have a chance of passing? What do you think?
I think so, Jenna. I mean, one thing you look at when everybody talks bipartisan, first of all, it's kind of laughable in Washington. When you hear bipartisan, you go down the list, you go, oh, look, there's 50 Democrats and 1 Republican, and they call it bipartisan. This is different. I mean, Marco Rubio is sponsoring this in the Senate. There are some conservative House members that are sponsoring it in the House. But beyond all of that, let's remember Donald Trump and his administration wanted to ban TikTok outright when he was president. So, I mean, this has a strong bipartisan support, and I think you're going to see something get done. And once again, it's not an official ban on TikTok. I think what it would specifically do is go ahead and make sure that there is pressure on companies that are associated with the Chinese to make sure there are no ties there whatsoever to the CCP and Russia.
Signed the Same-Sex Marriage Act into law earlier this afternoon. And speaking of bipartisanship, 39 House Republicans and 12 Republicans in the Senate voted in support of the protections, despite concerns it will encroach on religious freedom. David, how much is this bill an example of bipartisanship compromise, or bipartisan compromise, rather, in 2022? And could we see more of that in the coming year with a divided Congress?
Well, I think this is a one-off, John. And, you know, a lot of people will call this bipartisan because technically it is. I see it differently. And I think a lot of Americans, especially a lot of Christian Americans, see it differently. I don't think they see this as bipartisan. I think they see this as an acquiescing to the culture by many Republicans. I mean, look at Mitt Romney, the Mormon, and I put his religion in there for on purpose. A Mormon Mitt Romney supporting something like this. How is that going to play within the Mormon community? I mean, you know, they're very, very conservative, as you know. And so I could just go down the list as it relates to evangelical Christians. So I think there's an acquiescing to the culture. We have seen this time and time again as same-sex marriage becomes more commonplace. We're seeing a lot of Republicans, in essence, acquiesce and say, you know what, it's not a hill to die on. The polls look fine on it for them politically, and so they'll go ahead and vote for it. And I think that's more what we're seeing rather than strict bipartisanship.
David, while we have you here, I want to talk about 2024, a new USA Today Suffolk poll getting a lot of attention. It shows Florida Governor Ron DeSantis leading former President Trump among GOP voters in a primary matchup. 56% to 33% prefer DeSantis. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think something's in the water, Jenna. I really do. Look, let's put the caveat out there that polls schmoles, as they say. You know, look, we don't really care too much about polls necessarily, but This one is interesting, but beyond all of that, we are starting to see people like Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, some other conservatives start to distance themselves from Trump. We're starting to see the fault lines develop. So I think there's something in the water here. I think Donald Trump has to be very careful. This is not going to be a coronation at all. And let's remember, he did a lot of great things as president. That's what a lot of conservatives and evangelicals will say. But this time around, he comes with a lot of baggage. And I think that's going to make this a much harder try at the presidency for Trump, especially because you have people like Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, and others that will distance themselves from the former president.
Yeah, Trumpism without Trump, is this someone with Suffolk quoted
Right.
today. All right, David Reddy, thank you. We'll leave it there.
Thanks, David.
You bet.
Well, a major scientific breakthrough could pave the way for advancements in national defense and the future of clean energy.
That's right. Experiments in nuclear fusion made history in California last week. CBN's Brody Carter shows us how it could change the future.
California scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory were able to use a 1980s laser system to create pure, clean energy. A first for the history books, sparking curiosity for the future of science and technology.
I can honestly respond that I blow things up on the world's largest laser.
We get to create for a billionth of a second a little tiny piece of a star, and I get to see what happens. And I can't fully express how thrilling that is.
This is the National Ignition Facility, the world's largest and most energetic laser system used to study confinement nuclear fusion.
During experiments, 192 high-energy lasers converge on a target about the size of a peppercorn, heating a capsule of deuterium and tritium to over 3 million degrees Celsius and briefly simulating the conditions of a star.
Nuclear fusion was discovered in 1951, and scientists have made it their goal to get more energy to come out and go into their experiment. It's the same process used by the sun, and it's also used to detonate thermonuclear bombs. Now, scientists hit those energy gain goals in a process called fusion ignition.
Last week, for the first time, they designed this experiment so that the fusion fuel stayed hot enough, dense enough, and round enough for long enough that it ignited, and it produced more energies than the lasers had deposited. About 2 megajoules in, about 3 megajoules out.
While this is groundbreaking, it will be decades before they can perfect and commercialize nuclear fusion.
This is one igniting capsule, one time, and to realize commercial fusion energy, you have to do many things. You have to be able to produce many, many fusion ignition events per minute. And you have to have a robust system of drivers. Now that we have a capsule that ignites, we need to figure out, can we make it simpler? Can we begin to make this process easier and more repeatable? Can we begin to do it more than one time a day? Can we start working toward rep rate? And each of these is an incredible scientific and engineering challenge.
The laboratory's director says with research on laser technology and significant investment, the U.S. could potentially build a power plant in a few decades. Now, fusion energy, it promises carbon-free energy and could one day replace nuclear power plants. Brody Carter, CBN News.
The new Congress is set to be sworn in after the first of the year coming up. The faith story of an anchorman turned congressman. Welcome back. When the new session begins next month, Congress will boast more than 70 fresh faces on Capitol Hill.
While some new members might look to make waves and score wins for their home districts, CBN's Matt Galka introduces us to one incoming congressman who believes his call to public service reveals a higher purpose.
Representative-elect Mark Alford didn't think he'd be here just about a year ago. He figured he'd still be behind a news desk, a place he's spent the last 20 years. But now he believes that all of that time spent in front of the camera was just God preparing him for his moment in Congress. It can be hard finding your way around the Capitol when you're the new guy.
Everyone who's been here a while or been in politics, government says it's like drinking out of not just a fire hose, but a fire hydrant. Forget the hose. There's so much information coming at you.
We met up with Representative-elect Mark Alford shortly after he won his Missouri midterm.
It's just overwhelming. I get here, like the first day we get on the House floor, I mean, I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be on the House floor, and come January 3rd, I will be there, and that will be my job.
Alford's background is in television news. After reporting and anchoring in Kansas City for more than 2 decades, he felt like his voice wasn't being heard clear enough.
I don't consider them conservative views. It was the facts. It was the other side of the story. It was what was missing a lot of times to give the story balance.
That's when he started to reflect about his next move, and it started with prayer.
And so it was a very scary leap. I've never done anything like that in my life, just to go out. But I felt God pushing me out this window, and He was saying, fly, trust me, fly. And I did it. We took that leap. I turned in my 2 weeks resignation. I went on the last day of our air, and I told the viewers, everything that I have done up to this point was to tell you the truth, because that's the only thing that matters, is truth. And those were my last words, and then I filed for this office, announced our candidacy.
He takes over for Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler. After getting some tips from her at the Capitol, he'll turn his focus towards issues in his district, including hardships being felt by rural Missourians.
We need to make sure that our farmers are protected. And so with the Farm Bill coming up in 2023, I'm hoping to get on the Ag Committee to help push through a farm bill that's going to be beneficial for the American people as far as the food programs go, which makes up 80% of it, but also equally important for our farmers that need protection, that need crop insurance, that need Americans to get behind them and say, we believe in you.
While Alford might not know his way inside the Beltway quite yet, he's confident in his guide.
President Reagan said some 40 years ago something to this effect: it's time for us to reassert our trust in God. It's time to realize that we need Him more than He needs us, and it's time to turn to God for the healing of America. I want to be part of that healing. I don't know what kind of role I'll be able to play. I'm just be one voice, but I want to do all I can to make that happen.
Alford says he'd like to produce a weekly news-style program for his constituents from Capitol Hill. He'll be part of the 118th Congress that'll be officially sworn in on January 3rd. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Welcome back. For travelers wanting to experience Christmas in the Holy Land, Jenna, is that you?
You know, I like being home at Christmas, but I like this next story.
Same here. It's now possible again after a 2-year shutdown due to COVID.
I do want to go to the Holy Land someday, though. I will say that. But for people who can't make the trip, Israeli businesses are bringing the Holy Land to them. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from the Old City in Jerusalem.
Here at Jerusalem's Jaffa Gate, Christian pilgrims and tourists are back. Israel's Ministry of Tourism says tourism is now back to near pre-COVID pandemic levels. But for many people, a visit here to the Holy Land is still a dream. That's where one shop here in Jerusalem's Old City comes in.
Zach's Gifts, it's a Jerusalemite Christian site. Now, after the 2 years of COVID, it has been the largest website in Jerusalem that provides Christian items that brings the Bible to life.
Zach Mishriki owns a third-generation gift shop in the Old City. He offers a range of gifts from olive wood nativity sets to ancient coins and oil lamps.
I want to communicate the biblical truth or the biblical stories, things that were found in our Bible. For example, when I sell the coin from the Jesus time, the coin of the widow's mite. This year I made this, 2 replica coin of the widow's mite. And I put on top of it, it's your heart that matters, not your money. It's the biblical truth. God cares for our heart. He doesn't need any money.
Workers here do, however, so while providing gifts with meaning, Mishriki also supports struggling Christian brothers and sisters.
We need people who love Christ to be here. It's important that pilgrims, when they come to Jerusalem, they see that this is not only stone or churches, but they can see real people who have experienced God and testify that His tomb is empty. My business allows people to work and to be productive and have food on their table and stay here.
That's where Artza Box also plays a role, a Jewish company designed to bring the Holy Land to Christians in North America.
The main goal for Artza is to connect people in Israel to people in America, is to connect people to the Bible, to the words, to the stories of the Bible, but it's also to connect people to modern-day Israel, to the people that live here, to the small businesses, to daily life here as well. And it's kind of connecting this, this mixture of ancient and biblical, but also modern, between Israel, between America, and kind of combining that all together.
An Artzabox subscription provides locally made gifts 4 times throughout the year. This month's focus is on towns connected with the life of Jesus.
But because it's Christmas and, you know, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, we have products from Bethlehem, from Jerusalem, from Nazareth, and from the Galilee. Every place has 2 products from that place, and it kind of takes on this immersive journey throughout Israel from all of those regions. And they're really beautiful, they're completely unique, and we're incredibly excited for people to receive them.
Like Mashriki, Artza provides local businesses and charities with much-needed work.
Countless of these businesses and charities, they cry on the phone to us when we place the order and when we work with them, telling us that directly because of Artza and our subscribers, they've managed to stay in business for another 5 months, or they've managed to keep their employees.
Artza founder Itzhai Schimmel says the gift boxes bring the Holy Land to life.
They get very emotional when open them up with family, with friends. You've got kids opening up with their grandparents. You've got grandparents with their grandkids. You've got husbands and wives. It's been very heartwarming.
Artzabox and Zach's Jerusalem Gifts aim to bring the Christmas season to life, and that regardless of COVID, the message remains the same.
The last 2 years, the message was, do not worry, God is good. You know, now after COVID is over and life came back to normal, I still assure you that God is still good. God is good, and His mercy and goodness shall follow you till the end of days, with COVID or with no COVID. He is good.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem's Old City.
And finally tonight, more than 2 decades after landmarks in New York City were destroyed on 9/11, a church in Lower Manhattan has reopened for worship.
That's right. It took more than 21 years, but St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church, destroyed in the collapse of the Twin Towers, finally opened its doors stronger than ever. The church held its first service last Tuesday, fittingly around the Feast of St. Nicholas. The National Shrine is open to anyone, built in memory of the nearly 3,000 lives lost in the attack. A church official said the service demonstrated both remembrance and resilience, marking an extraordinary day for New York and America.
That's a beautiful building, beautiful church.
Well, thanks so much for watching.
Have a great night.